So I thought maybe I'll instead of giving the regular kind of talk on what books have been written and what topics they have covered, I will just give you a brief overview of what's happening in Indian diaspora and India-Australia kind of relation. Is that all right with you guys? I hope. And if you have early career researchers or master students who are planning to do PhD, or master students who are planning to do research, PhD students who are planning to do postdoctoral research, these are some of the good ideas that they can look into, what's happening. And so I thought maybe to focus more on text and their context. So text is obviously very important. And at any point, if you're not able to hear me, just message me, because it's raining in Melbourne right now. And our systems, the internet usually plays up. So just message me if you're not able to hear me. The literary texts are well known into entering or creating a better dialogue with other discourses such as gender, family, class, caste. Not limited to these, but these are very essential topics and areas when you talk about diaspora. And when we talk about Indian diaspora in Australia, particularly Indian origin writers, so you have two groups of writers. One who are very well-known writers, such as Meena Abdullah, Satyendra Nandan, Arvind Adiga, Shalini Akhil, Christopher Cyril, Christopher Raja, Ruana Gonsalves, Sunil Badami write short stories and essays. But there are some very little known writers as well. So you have Manisha Amin, Glendy Cruz, Rashmi Bhatti, Neela Maharaj, Shrishti Sharma, Sunita, and the list goes on and on, right? So there are these people who are either self-published or maybe one book wonders. So if you're planning to do research, you can write email to me and I'll just send you a list of some writers. The other thing that I've noticed in these two groups of writers, why some writers are well known in India, Australia, and why some are not well known, is because of the reasons of stages of writing, right? So I've kind of charted 4 stages of writing. The first stage is immigration journey stage of writing, where people write about their private journeys from home country to host country, right? So it's a regular life of Pi or Brick Lane kind of story going on, right? And the other one is multicultural works, which explore the idea of assimilation. So Christopher Raja, Christopher Cyril kind of fall into that group, where they write about assimilation of their families into Australia, say in Victorian regional areas of Victoria or Northern Territory, faraway places, not cosmopolitan, right? And the third stage is the diaspora writing, right? Like Naipaul, Salman Rushdie, and others. So they write about the collective identity. It's not so much focused on individual character and his or her family or their family. It's more about the diaspora as a collective. And the fourth stage of writing, which actually makes a writer well known in Australia. So when the writer is at third stage, he or she is well known amongst academics, fellow diaspora writers. When the writer reaches the fourth stage, that's the cosmopolitan, where they present protagonists as individuals. So their identity as Indian doesn't matter that much. And sometimes the protagonist is not even Indian. Some Bangladeshi Australian writers and Sri Lankan Australian writers have tried that. Arvind Adiga is also cosmopolitan writer, because if you look at his writings, the white title, right? So I hope this is kind of the distinctions in stages of writing should be very clear what we are talking about. So when we talk about diaspora writing, it's a collective identity based, right? So when we think of these, the first 3 categories, immigration, multicultural, and diaspora, you will see that there are some, a handful of constant themes, very similar things. First is the constant yearning for roots, romanticizing the past. I lived in Kolkata, we had so many servants, I had a swimming pool, but now the life is really not going well, kind of thing. The other one is coming to terms with their sense of Australianness or their recently acquired Australian identity. So this is through the lens of multilingual, multicultural identity. I'm not alone, there are so many other people here in Australia, that kind of thing going on. The third key theme is to struggle to negotiate in the new home, culture, and environment, right? Which often results in fragmentation, detachment, and alienation of the key characters. The fourth theme that is looked into is dilemmas presented at personal level, which are often connected to community. So a large number of short stories that I analyzed in my PhD, and that was part of the 2 books that I did authored. This is a very constant theme: the fragmentation, detachment, alienation, and then becoming a whole once you get an idea or sense of your new culture and environment. The next theme that they cover is fighting the stereotypical image of the migrant male or female, and this is a very constant theme when you look at multicultural. Chandni Lokuge, Yasmin Gunuratne from Sri Lanka have done this. And finally, this is something that I consider very important: the diasporic family as a whole. It emerges as an empowering location, a safe haven from harsh realities such as racism, underemployment, exploitation at work. But we have to remember that there is a complex dynamics of class and caste consciousness that is emerging in public sphere. While I do not believe that, I haven't seen any book that has talked about caste, but if you have been following news, particularly from USA, there has been too many instances where a particular group is trying to force the legislators into, by talking to them that apart from racism, caste should also be included, but it's not found. That's my personal experience as well as a diasporan, as an Indian Australian, that caste doesn't play any more role. Once you cross the sea, if you look, I've been teaching in Fiji for three years plus. There was no talk about caste, although you had Mishras, Prasads, all those surnames are still there, but some people don't even use their name. So what I look at, and I've looked at it in my book Roots and Labels and Location, is that the caste dynamics kind of merge with class consciousness, and then class becomes the haves and have-nots, right? So it doesn't matter what caste you belong to. But this is something that people, younger scholars, can look into if new writers are writing. But in terms of, as I said, there was a time when the Australian government was kind of funding Indian Australian writers. They were actually paying writers to take off from their usual roles as doctors, engineers, and write about their experiences to become part of multicultural work. So not much as diaspora writing, but part of multicultural or literary works. And nowadays they are not doing that much. So now it's literary field is becoming too competitive. You have younger writers. There is a poetry novel, fantasy fiction, that kind of thing. So not. In case anyone is interested, they can look into, for a brief history, key context, you can look into labels and location, give you a general impression, and not much has changed in the last 5 years, except for 1 or 2 new writers. Others are still struggling to find a voice and get published. So at the end of the day, they want to get published. Australian publishers are too white. Sorry to say about that, but that's the thing. Now, so in the last couple of years, while I was doing my PhD, the journey started then. I started focusing less on text and more on context, right? So what's outside those texts started getting more and more attention, because writers were still writing based on their whims and fancies, or based on the demands of the publisher, editor, please add this, more stereotypical family, that kind of thing. So the outside context, what was in the newspapers, what was in the policies, what were in the interviews of actual people, started getting my attention, and that's what I call baggage, right? And it is said that when a man travels, he takes with him what he can, but his baggage cannot hold everything. And these context is something that the novel cannot hold, because novel or short story or poetry has certain limitations, and these things are always left out. So just to give you an idea that, there are over 7.6 million or 8 million migrants living in Australia. right? So almost 30% of the population is migrant. Even the rest is migrant. If you look at the Anglo-Australians, they have come from somewhere else. So everyone is a migrant in Australia. Almost world's every ancestry is here. But people of India, that's the main focus here. So Indian ancestry are, in the last census 2021, 780,000. That's 7,80,000 Indians. That's an increase of 165,000 from 2016. So you will see that Australia has become a very attractive destination for both education, business, and skilled migrants. So this is something that should be looked into. If we are moving here, then what's the literary output, right? So literary output is still less. And we are the second largest overseas born resident group in Australia. Median age is 35. That's very promising. We are highly educated, 63%. Highly employed, 51% of the Indian Australians are working full-time. And high personal income. So almost 90,000 plus is the basic income that overall 23% of the people are earning, which is very good. Others are also earning 60,000 plus. And the survey said that at this rate, by 2035, Indians are going to be 1 million plus in Australia, which is very promising because unlike some other diasporas, Indian diaspora is very much represented, and it's also called Australia's national asset by the former Prime Minister and even the present Prime Minister. So we are in almost all spheres: academic, business, politics, civil society, government, arts, sports. But the context is very important, right? So one of the key context is that if Indian Australians are so many in number, why they are underrepresented in politics. That's something to be looked into, right? So none of the novels or short stories that you will read focus on that. They never imagine a Rishi Sunak kind of character, right? So it's still not there. It's still not registering. So writers are not going beyond their, the safety zone, basically, comfort zone, in thinking about topics, right? The second one is during COVID, I don't know if you read that in news that the Australian government actually cut off flights from India, right? And Indian diaspora, because it was so large in number, and this happened around, I think most of them went to India for school holidays during December and January. That's the time when school holidays happen and schools reopen in February, and COVID happened in February, right? January end, and they stopped flights. So Indian diaspora was one of the worst sufferers. A lot of people lost their jobs. So I'm still figuring out if writers are thinking about these cultural assertion and political recognition and diaspora welfare in terms of that topic. The third thing in the context is the cultural issues of the diaspora. For example, in 2006, I was in Australia at Monash for 1 year, and that's when the first time Diwali festival was celebrated in Melbourne City in a public place where everyone was invited. And since then, it has been celebrated every year. And this year, Indian Australians are asking that Diwali should be recognized as an optional holiday, right? So there is this role of soft power or cultural diplomacy of Indian Australians, particularly Indian cultural gurus. So Indian dancers, Indian performing artists have been coming to Australia since 1947, and I've pointed that in the Celestial Dances and the Dancing God as well. So the role of Indian cultural gurus has still not been highlighted in any of the books that I have read. The third thing to look at is literature. Apart from literature is cinema. That's part of the package. The stories told via cinema, and it's still not there. Anupam Sharma made one movie, An Indian. There are some others who have made movies put on YouTube or Amazon, but the quality is not that much. So there is a lack in general, lack of writing, right? Good books are usually made into movies. So, for example, Lion is a very good example, but it catered to a wider market. So the writers need to write books that cater to a wider market. So maybe, not just India, Australia kind of thing that can bring Hollywood. I've talked about the business is another thing. Recently, Sukhinder Singh Cassidy, she's a Canadian Sikh, born in Tanzania. She has been appointed as the CEO of an accounting firm in New Zealand. Similarly, many Indian Australians have been appointed CEOs or managing directors of various Australian firms or multinational companies, right? This is still not reflected in any of the books that you will read. The story is still, we came here with $25 in our pocket, and that story becomes repetitive. Although the publication demand is that you should publish that. The other story that's not being told is Indian origin people in STEM, sciences, technology, education, mathematics. We have an Indian Australian person. He teaches in US. He's recognized as one of the best minds from Indian Australia, Indian Australian best minds. He's a professor. He has won numerous awards. So people are not telling their stories. And I think one of the reasons why I co-founded the Australia Today was to tell the story of Indian Australians to the world. Now, I've looked at there are certain missed opportunities when it comes to India-Australia relations, particularly through diaspora. Under Narendra Modi, 2014, even before that, I think Jawaharlal Nehru kind of started using India's cultural power, particularly if you look at the 11 classical dances, recognition of the classical dances, and then moving them from state to state to make India one. Narendra Modi had kind of used that as a model of cultural diplomacy with his Paraspara diplomacy that I call Paraspara diplomacy. He has been using that to reach out to the diaspora, but that has been a very cultural reach, right? I think the Indian government, Australian government too, should use diaspora, Indian Australian diaspora, for economic and political ties, because this is where the new business ecosystem, the startup ecosystem is working. Another one is recognizing cross-border connections, right? To break polarization by sports, art, cinema, research. They have started it because of the continuous demand of skilled people in Australia. But the key opportunity that they have missed is to actually engage with Indian diaspora in a coordinated way. So, for example, I live in Melbourne. In Victoria, we have 55 Indian associations belonging to different states, regions, language-based, other groups, and then they have a peak body. But the peak bodies, anyone can create a peak body. I can start a peak body and say 5 people are with me. So there needs to be a coordinated kind of dealing, and this will help literature, arts, performance as well. So one of the things that Scott Morrison, the former Prime Minister, he actually proposed, I think it was a $42 million think tank just dedicated to Indian Australian diaspora. And I think his wavelength was there, where he was thinking in terms of how to cater to this ever-increasing diaspora and their needs. The new Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has approved it. So this is a good step. And we will have to look at, how it goes. The other missed opportunity that has been is that anything that happens in Australia, anything that happens in India, or anything that happens to India worldwide has repercussions in Australia. So, for example, if you look at Freedom Index, Hunger Index, Human Rights Index, anything that happens, maybe it's published in Europe and there is a politics involved, and we have highlighted that through the Australia Today, the newspaper that I founded, that how Freedom Index and Hunger Index are biased and and how these indexes are used by other countries to negatively impact India's reputation, and also by using politics from India. So we were kind of able to highlight, and this is not just India. It's been happening in Solomon Islands, Fiji, Pacific countries as well. So they use these indexes, and when I said it impacts, it has repercussions. It has repercussions on Indian Australians because they feel kind of bad and demotivated, demoralized, because these are the people who are bringing business, who are writing about these things. And when they go to their workplaces, people obviously ask them questions. Now, Christopher Raja, in his one of his books, has actually talked about political extremism in India, and that was a very good beginning. And he, I think, won the Northern Territory Premier's Prize. So, as I said, any publisher who is ready to take chances with new material is able to actually get wider audiences, not just limited Indian diaspora audiences. So I think Christopher Raja's book talked about the impact of 1984 Indira Gandhi assassination and the Congress Sikh rights, which are presented globally as Hindu Sikh rights, and then he talks about these political violence, and he's from Kolkata. So his book is called The Burning Elephant. And at that point of time in 1984, his family is trying to move to Australia. So he talks about how things are going there. So you will see that some writers are taking that chance, but we still need people, the new generation of writers, to think about the missed opportunities in writing, particularly with reference to the actual context, not just their family context, but to build a larger picture around these things. Bangladeshi Australian writer Abid Khan has done that a lot in his work. I think he wrote 4 or 5 novels. Spiral Road was one of his novels where he doesn't talk about Bangladesh, Australia. He talks about an Anglo-Australian who has returned from, say, Vietnam War or Korea War, and then he talks about those guys. The novel was not successful, but I like the way a Bangladeshi Australian writer can talk about feelings and texts and contexts about mainstream Australians. These are the things that I think people, if you are a researcher based in India and you're planning to do either MA, MPhil, PhD, postdoctoral research, you should start thinking in terms of wider context. Do not just limit yourself to these texts, because texts are very limited. I think there is more happening outside. And if you're able to connect the text to these wider contexts, I think that would be actually helpful for the policymakers as well, from both India and Australia, because they actually read. I've been told a couple of times that they have read my book because it's in their library, like the DFAT library or the Indian Parliament. So they do go through these things. They do read what people from literature background are writing, and that would be something. If you start multinational research initiatives, these should be promoted through a proper dialogue through India, Australia, and diaspora. Thank you.
Thanks for your nice session, and our audience has some questions. Please proceed to.
Thank you so much. I have a very good idea about the Indian community in Australia. I think you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
The focus of your presentation is, of course, the Indian-Australian community, the relationship between Australia and India, things like that. I was thinking from another point of view, since Australia is also a kind of multicultural country, there are obvious questions of assimilation or acculturation, etc., etc. But it's a very complex complex issue to my mind. And I was thinking about, I would like to have your opinion about this. Focusing too much on Indian community and its relationship with Indian government and India as a whole, does it pose some kind of challenge to multiculturalism, because it might hamper Indian community's relationship with the white Australians and the Aboriginals and the other Asian communities, for example? What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a very good question, but the idea of assimilation and multiculturalism that we have been reading, so till 2013, I was an Indian academic, and I had the same ideas about multicultural assimilation that I read in the books. But after 2013, I moved here. It's been now, I think, 7-8 years. So the idea of multiculturalism that we theoretically understand is very different from an actual lived reality. So basically, so for example, just take the festival of Diwali, right? In New South Wales, Queensland and Victoria, Diwali is celebrated as a separate festival. In Western Australia, Diwali is clubbed together and it's celebrated as Festival of Light with Southeast Asian community, the Buddhist community from China, Mongolia and other places, Indian community and the Punjabi Sikh community. So everyone gets their stall and there is one government festival. So if you look at the idea of multiculturalism from that point of view, that it's very encouraging, it's very assimilating, everyone gets their space. So the Western Australia idea of it's a cut-off community. But if you look at New South Wales and Victoria, where the number of Indians is really high, skilled, they celebrate their festival. Everyone gets their space. Similarly, the Chinese get their space. Arab communities and the Muslim diaspora gets their space to celebrate. So no one encroaches on each other's space, and that's the beauty of it. So everyone is able to celebrate. So it's not like if you look at UK, where problems have started emerging with multiculturalism, community safety and all those. So unlike that, you don't hear the word Muslim area or Hindu area, Christian area in Australia. So there are, one of the things that Australia did really well was there were no ghettos like the older diaspora, UK or USA, even Europe, right? So it's a very mixed kind of community. For example, where I live, so it's Indians, Persians. I just live right next to the mosque. A big mosque, so the Iranian, Afghan, Pakistanis, and some other Arab country people go there. There are a large number of Tamils in my area. Recently, they have started resettling the Afghan diaspora, people who are escaping Taliban. So in that way, Australian multiculturalism has always been a way ahead of a bit. Rather than if you look at Canadian, US or UK assimilation kind of policy, where you can practice your religion, cultural festivals indoors or within your community, but you can't do it openly. So people do celebrate things openly here, but the space is demarked. So basically no one steps on. Am I able to answer your question or?
More or less. I was also seeking some your response or inputs from on the question of communities from relationship between communities from Asia.
communities do live in harmony with each other. We do not have, it's actually the infighting, if you hear it in news, is going on between the Khalistanis and the Hindu diaspora, not between the Chinese and the Indians, right? If anything is happening on India-China border, it stays there. Doesn't affect my best friends. When I was working at Deakin or RMIT, some of my best friends were Chinese, the colleagues were Chinese, so nothing happens there. It's usually, I was going to talk about extremism as one of the key points and missed opportunities, and no one talks about it anymore. But being a journalist, we kind of do talk about it openly. We are seeing one of the key problematic areas is that extremism is going to take over Australia, just like Canada. So we do warn policymakers in Australia to keep an eye on Islamist terror and Khalistani terror particularly. These are ideologies that should be looked into. But apart from that, if you look at Indian diaspora vis-a-vis other diasporas, it's a very collaborative. In some cases, I've seen recently we interviewed a Chinese Australian who can sing in Hindi, and he has learned Hindi. So you will see you will see these things happening where Tamils have been invited to perform Bharatanatyam at a Chinese gathering, or the Chinese drummers are invited in the Punjabi Bhangra. So that kind of thing is taking place here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I have another small question.
Yeah.
Why is it, as you said, there is not much literary products from India or from Asia as a whole? What is the reason for that? Because we in India, for example, don't find references to many Indian writers in Australia.
Yeah.
Writers like Adib Khan have written quite a good number of novels, 7 or 8 or something like that. We don't know much about Adib Khan or writers of his ilk. So, what might be the reason for this scarcity of writings? Why is it not?
Yeah. So if you will look at, so I'm a publisher. So I've recently started a publication house dedicated to South Asian diaspora writers and Pacific writers, and it's been almost 1 year. I haven't got a single manuscript submission. Right? When I started it, I thought, I know there are so many people who want to write. When I meet them as a journalist, they say, "Oh, I have a story to tell," and so I encourage them to please submit something to me. So there is this idea of being a writer. When I was teaching in India and Pacific, I used to tell my students, you want to be a real teacher or you want to pretend to be a teacher, right? So you can go to a classroom, read work, and then go take your salary and go back without making actual difference to the lives of your students, right? So you can do that. Similarly, there are people who want to be a writer, who want to actually write, and then there are many others who just want to pretend to be a writer, right? So there is a full novella, or short. They just tell you a good story. They are yarn makers. Then the second problem is with publication industry. So even if Adib Khan was published, so the number of print runs would be far less for him than for an Australian writer. So that's one of the reasons that you do not get in India. And one of the reasons I moved here, because my area of research is South Asian diaspora and India-Australia cultural relations, and every time I needed to do research, I had to apply for short and long-term grants, and that was kind of creating a problem, traveling. So there is no dearth of research material. For example, I focused on short stories. Someone can focus on, I think I know people who have done their PhDs on novels, and you can obviously look into poetry. But yeah, I would agree that there is definitely a problem with the output. We do not have that many writers who are coming to fore because they do not get a chance to get published, because these publishers are looking for something typical, stereotypical diaspora and maybe migrant journey, not the other ground.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
So on behalf of organizing committee member and Manbhum Mahavidyalaya, I would like to thank Dr. Amit Sarwal for his wonderful topic on diaspora. I am sure that students must be benefited from your talk and your elaboration session. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
Partho, can you hear me? We are on YouTube Live. Can you please proceed?
So now we'll move on to our next speaker, Dr. Gautam Buddha Shural. So before we start, we'll just felicitate Dr. Shural and Dr. Himatri Lahiri. And this session will be chaired by Dr. Professor Himatri Lahiri, and Professor Gautam Buddha Shural will deliver his lecture. So, brief introduction about Dr. Shural. Professor Gautam Buddha Shural, Department of English, Bankura University, has been teaching since 1990. Sorry, please. And he joined
Paulo, please check. No sound is coming to the Google Meet room.
ঠিক আছে, চলে আসবে, আমি আনমিউট করে দিচ্ছি। হ্যাঁ, ওকে ওকে। So you can continue.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Manbhum, and thanks to the college authority, the governing body, and members who are associated with the college of different capacities for inviting me to this seminar or conference, whatever. And I have an important relationship with Dr. Manbhum because I call him usually Pastor. So, all my respected colleagues here, Mr. Himanshu Naidi is chairing the session, and Professor Naidi is one of my mentors in a sense. And I think not in a sense, more than one sense, right? As far as the teaching community here is concerned, I begin with my heartfelt regards for it. I will be talking for around 30 minutes, as Dr. said. That is the time limit set for me. So I begin at 8 to 1, right? I will try to stick to that time limit. ছাত্ররা যারা পিছনে বসে আছো, আমি জানি না ছাত্রদের জন্য এইসব সেমিনারটা নেওয়ার হয়, ছাত্ররা খুব একটা হয়তো আমরা তো ছাত্র ছিল এরকমই হতে হয়। I do not know, but I request you, because we had two good online sessions, and both those sessions were interactive. So I think you understood some of it. And I will be talking, as you can see from my first slide, I will be focusing on the poems of Mina Alexander, diasporic poet. So I'm reading a number of his poems in the second part of my paper. And the first part is a kind of a general introduction that I try to situate Mina Alexander as a diasporic poet, right? So the word diaspora, which implies a dislocation from homeland, has a distinct resonances of identity, because the title of my paper is the relationship between memory and identity. That is the focus of my paper. So the word diaspora, which implies a dislocation from homeland, has distinct resonances of identity. The two terms are inextricably interlinked. People who migrate to a foreign land for professional or other reasons get deterritorialized. But geographical deterritorialization does not mean unburdening of his or her cultural baggage. In fact, persons who move to a foreign land carry with them a deep-rooted cultural force of their native land. Just now, Himanshu was asking the expert from Australia about assimilation. In appropriations, these are very common words in diasporic studies. So, in fact, persons who move to a foreign land carry with them a deep-rooted cultural force of their native land. Identity, on the other hand, as Abdul Brown observes, is simultaneously subjective and is simultaneously subjective and social, and is constituted in and through culture. Indeed, culture and identity are inextricably linked concepts. I need the lines.
Oh, sorry.
So, I will come to this location. In an essay entitled Diaspora and Double Consciousness, Samir says something similar. And what Samir says, he says, a self-conscious transvaluation of diaspora foregrounds the specular relationship of West and non-West, It thus brings to the fore issues of identity construction in cultural difference. Writing about the relation between cultural memory and identity, Benzi observed a French diaspora critic. And you can see this. Since the Renaissance times, memory has been considered as the seat of identity. Today, however, the situation has become much more complicated for Asian diasporas in North America, since memory implicates not only a seat of their self-consciousness, but also a collective realm of cultural preservation in society, where the social systems of beliefs and practices constantly efface and erase their traditions. Cultural memory, in other words, involves an ongoing process of identity construction and reconstruction, motivated by collective efforts of Asian diasporas to build community solidarity. It is obvious that the art of remembering is crucial for Asian diasporas to revitalize the flow of their traditions and to redefine the meaning of their cultural identities within their current social contexts. This is what the observation of John means. For the diasporic writers in general, I will tell you, who can go to next. For the diasporic writers in general, memory plays a cultural role in emotionally sustaining them in their day-to-day life in their respective country of migration. In her memoir, False Lines, that is the memoir of Mina Alexander, she says, I am a woman cracked by multiple migrations, uprooted so many times, she can connect nothing with nothing. That's what she says. Although she said this about herself, all her life she went on making continuous effort through her literary endeavors, especially poetry, to remain connected to her roots. Meena was born in Allahabad, the poet I'm talking about. She was born in Allahabad, India, and moved to Khartoum, Sudan, where she had her schooling, and then studied at the University of Kabul. Thereafter, she went to the University of Nottingham in England, where she earned a PhD. She came back to India and worked in a number of institutions till she met her husband, David Ledigold, a historian in Central Institute of English in Hyderabad, and following her marriage in 1979, immigrated to America. Michelle Gashman Valadares, in a paper Remembering Mina Alexander, observes that these different phases of her exterior journey are linked together by the lyrical interiority of memory, landscape, and loss. Mina Alexander's diaspora poems dig up from her memory the reverberations of the tradition of Indian cultural sensibilities. In her poems, she often looks through the prism of her memory and punctuates the story of her diasporic existence with a heavy burden of living in a country which she does not think of as her home. At the same time, an effort to reconcile the multiple places of residence is also to be found in the poems. In her own words, I quote the line from one of her poems. In her own words, almost always I am in two places at once, sometimes in three. Her wanderings around the world started at the age of 5, when she accompanied her parents to Sudan in connection with her father's job. Child's mind was not sufficiently aware to store in her memory the impression of a voyage to Sudan. She wrote, I again quote her, I was 5 years old and tried to understand what was happening. My soul ran away with me. So when they landed in Sudan, the war was going on in that country, and she says that the memory of those days I cannot bear to remember. Her experience, the journey, as she says, was awkward. And at such an early stage of her life, Mina was exposed to a number of languages that she had to grapple with to adjust with the changed location of her residence. So, in the first session, I referred to this kind of the exposure to multiple languages with migration, multiple migrations, when I asked that question to the expert, Professor Ali, in the first session, and almost same was the situation with Mina. She writes, the poet writes, I quote, "There were many languages floating in the fountain. In spite of sudden confusion, I decided not to stay thirsty." So these are lines from her poems. Her mother tongue was Malayalam, but she could speak Hindi, Sudanese Arabic, French, and English. It was this continuous linguistic shift that she talks about in these lines in her poem, Sing Formation, where she says, "We are living one language for the other, always and ever, what crossing enjoys." With every crossing of the sea or the airspace, there is change of language, and she is referring to that. Isabella Kimak observes that all her creative work exhibits a sensitivity to the experience of crossing borders, which entails the need to form new hybrid identities and to learn to juggle not only diverse cultures but diverse languages as well. Something very significant. And again, I go back to Mina's words. In an interview with Ruth Maxey, Alexandra herself says, "I have multiple languages working for me, but I have always grown up in a world where there were things one did not understand, because there were languages that were not completely accessible. It just gives you a particular sense of being in a world where you can be comfortable, even though linguistically the word is not really knowable." Right, this is what she says. And then next, in this connection, we can also take note of what Lopamuddra Basu observes. What she says, by talking about Alexander's poems, she says Alexander's practice of melding fragments of various languages in her poems reflected a commitment to cultural syncretism in India and in the US. In an essay, In the Shock of Arrival, you can see the pictures. In an essay, The Shock of Arrival, she celebrates women writers like Kuldat, Lalitamrika Antharjalam, and Sarojini Naidu as influential in her work. Simultaneously, she acknowledges the debt of American minority writers like Audre Lorde, Toni Morrison, Gloria Anzaldúa, and Leslie Marmon Simcoe, who influenced her own writing. In her poem, Atmospheric Embroidery, now I come to the second part of our poems. I have been reading selectively for our poems. In her poem, Atmospheric Embroidery, Alexandra refers to the Italian conceptual artist Alighiero Fabrizio Guerci, known for his embroidered maps of the world. The poet here is reflecting upon her own experience of living in India, Sudan, England, and the US. She writes, just 4 lines. In poetry's embroidery, in his mapping of the world, everything is cut and coupled. Occult pottery, silk and painted steel, sun and electric wood, butterfly and naked man. Like poetry, Alexander interlaces cartographic embroideries of her own, intersections and overlaps between various spaces, both geographical and metaphorical, that her poems evoke. A constant sense of dislocation, shifting from one home to the other, permeates her poems. In another of her poems, Water Crossing, she writes about her voyage to Sudan and the consequent loss of her life as a child in her ancestral house. And the poem goes like this. When I turned 5, high wind and water swallowed what I could remember. A mango grove where pigeons danced, symmetries of silk, saris of mined cotton, grandmothers, blackened pearls, and so much more. Amma was with me, but I was all alone. We had each other, but our life was lost. Salt water curved its sonorous veins. What the eye could bear in weight of loneliness, was this what it was to live in the world? This anguished questioning continued to haunt her all her life. Many of her poems, she nostalgically remembers a childhood, an ancestral house that gives her sustenance against an immigrant's anxiety. The quoted lines speak of her sense of loss as she got uprooted from her homeland, and even the mother who accompanied her in the journey to the new location failed to lift the weight of loneliness from her side. The words of C. Vijayasri may be mentioned in this connection. In her paper, Survival of an Athletic South Asian Immigrant Women's Rights, she focuses on women's experience of dislocation, displacement, and relocation. She writes, I quote, migration and relocation may be better conceptualized as cases of rupture and disjunctive crisis. This rupture and crisis acquire an extra age of urgency and urgency in the case of female immigrants because for them, diasporic living entails double distancing or double exile. Women are born into an expatriate state. The term expatriation is itself conjoined to patriarchy, and they are expatriated in patria. Hence, the geographic movement away from home to an alien country is only an accentuation of gender exile that they have all along borne. It is this sense of perpetual elsewhereness that steadily reinforces the woman's need for survival and self-preservation. We have to remember that Mina Alexander is a female writer, so these words have a particular relation to our diasporic existence. It was this need for survival and self-preservation that makes Alexander fall back on her memory to preserve her identity. In her poem, Tarawan, which rendered into English means ancestral house, she remembers the house with its various associations and also records a sense of loss. And the speaker in the poem laments as the old house was sold. Here she does not indulge in a luxury of nostalgia. Rather, it is a conscious effort to ascertain her cultural identity while living the life of an immigrant in a foreign country. She writes, again I quote from the poem, I was born to a house with red-dyed roof, Ochiat where sunbirds drew, glittering wings across mulberry bark, pond where koi crawled, then shot into light, circling the mouth of the lotus bloom, house of mist and stone. Unseen umbilicus, all that gilded me, even as the ocean swept on and on. Wind, gone. Memory penetrates to the fabric of the poem. The speaker's efforts to remember the ancestral house is actually her attempt to understand herself. As Zoll observes, I've already cited him, again I am citing from his book. It is obviously impossible to arrive at an understanding of one's self without the knowledge derived from memory of past experience. In light of this, it is no wonder that Asian diaspora poets express a kind of eagerness to get access to the deepest layers of memories for stored cultural values and traditions. Memory, in other words, provides Asian diaspora poets with a storage and retrieval device in which the past is remembered, re-experienced, and delivered to the present. The remembrance of the past makes her feel sad, and yet it gives her an emotional anchorage that helps her find out her true self. The house was sold subsequently, and she records that I mentioned the poem. The mango grove, the path where laburnum dropped its liquid gold, the jamun and jacaranda trees all vanished as the ownership of the house changed. In this connection, we refer to the words of Zhang, according to whom, for Asian diasporas to embrace memory is to possess and repossess their cultural traditions, and the remembrance of their past forms and the remembrance of their past forms an integral part of their affirmation of cultural identity. So this helps to preserve the self in unfamiliar land. Sandwiched between two cultures, the question of ethnicity is a recurring motif in Mina's poems. In her poem, River and Bridge, she writes, another poem, I have come to the Hudson's age to begin my life, to be born again, to sit as water might in a landscape of mist, burnished trees, a bridge that ceases crossing. But Homer knew it, and Gaza too, that river and bridge summon those whose stinging eyes crisscross red lights, metal implements, muscle films. Earth is always bloody. The association of river is covered in case of Homer, Gas, and the poet herself. We have all heard about beloved batch, as we know. So whereas which also means split or splitter. Why? Because as he separated or split the pages into 4 separate books is somewhat related to Alexander, as she also is split between her Indian and diasporic identities. I read the poem like that. In an interview, Alexander talked at length about the theme of splintered or splintering self that she explores in her poetry and fiction. The speaker is ready to begin her life anew, a second birth, as she says, but at the same time, there is this longing for the world left behind, and she can hardly ignore the call of the bridge to cross to the other side. She might find a new home in a new location, but the call of her homeland is difficult to forget. In this connection, I would like to quote the words of Mahavidyalaya. In her article, The New Parochialism, Homeland in the Writing of an Indian Diaspora, she writes, I quote her, the word home no longer signifies a given. It does not necessarily connote a sense of belonging. Instead, it necessarily foregrounds a personal choice which the individual has exercised, and home and homeland and for all practical purposes separable units. This is something very important, very significant. And I think the question he asked this expert from Australia, that has a kind of dimension to this kind of a position. That this what we find in Alexander's poems, one finds her constantly evoking the image of her homeland, although she has found her home in America. The conflict between heritage and citizenship is clearly noticeable in her poems. And the poet makes a continuous negotiation with the cultural memory to ascertain her identity. In the works of, again, I go back to John. Next slide. Cultural memory therefore provides a widely enriching landscape for the poet to relocate the deep dimension of his identity and confirms his renewed attachment to his heritage, which in turn gives him the feeling of belonging, collective awareness, and self-consciousness. These awareness and consciousness, moreover, do not merely yield an insight into the past, but more importantly, suggest a vision of the future. There is at times a sense of despair and resignation that one notices in Vina's poems. In her poems, No Rescue, she writes, you thought that by crossing all these seas, writing all these poems, something would happen. But nothing has happened except that you have grown older. That is one part of it. The other, the gods know, but keep quiet about it. The note of purposelessness is clear in the above lines, which perhaps describe the speaker's expectations and that remain unfulfilled. In her life, she hopped from one country to another, tried to find home in all these new locations, and through her literary efforts, by writing poems and fictions, tried to assimilate and appropriate the new cultures. But at the day's end, her feeling is one of futility, as she has not been able to strike roots anywhere. In Fault Lines, he asks a series of questions. Just listen. In Fault Lines, he asks, I quote, I'm a poet writing in America, but American poet? An Asian American poet then? A woman poet? A woman poet of color? A South Indian woman who makes up lines in English? A third world woman poet? Series of questions. All these self-interrogations point to a feeling of insecurity in respect of a diasporic identity. In a poem Krishna, one can hear a similar message that the poet is trying to communicate. For a diasporic writer, particularly for one who has experienced multiple migrations, the immigrant anxiety is uppermost, as I've already pointed out. The anxiety of not belonging to any place often makes the writer lose hope, and she desperately tries to stick to her identity as a poet or a writer. Alexander writes, the many words you have passed through, try to remember them as I do mine. Memory is all you have. Still, how much can you bear on your back? You have lost one language, gained another, lost a third. There's nothing you will inherit, neither by stripes nor by capital. No plot by the riverbank near your father's village of Kosancheri, this is a picture from the net, or by the burning heart in Varanasi. All you have is a writing hand smeared with ink and little bits of paper swirling in a violent wind. The speaker is troubled by a psychic restlessness, the only antidote to which she finds in her writer's self. It is to her poems that she hopes to cling to her memory, thereby trying to bridge the past and the present and counter the feeling of loss. She remained deeply attached in her writing to her Indian and particularly Kerala roots, while representing a multicultural sensibility, one that had been nurtured in India, Sudan, England, and the island of Manhattan, which was her final home since 1980s. Another of her poems, Network, is closely autobiographical, reminiscent of childhood memories intermixing with the present. One notices the diasporic imagination at work, from native Kerala to Broadway and 113th Street. The poem goes like this: she cut off all her hair, scampered down a staircase, skinned her knees. Years later, she pinched herself awake, hearing words in a foreign language. Books she longed to read, smudged with sunlight, Broadway and 113th Street, she whispered to herself. The sheer delight of walking a city street couldn't be rivaled. Her preferred method of work on an iPad, sitting in a sidewalk cafe. What she could hear and think, she wrote. One by one, she composed her lines, she numbered each with finicky care, struck, and hope was that the sentences would net a quicksilver eye swimming in ether. She wanted to make a balance between the life she lived in India as a child and the life that she was living in the US. The reference to quicksilver is significant. It may refer to a frequent movement due to transnational migrations and an effort to adjust with every new country and its culture. She enjoys the delight of living in a new country, but at the same time, she wants to swim in the sea of her memory. As the poem ends with the line, the river is so close, can I swim to another shore? The poet's longing is clear. To swim to another shore, the desire to go back to her roots. Diasporic writers often write about their homelands in order to preserve their identity, and in case of Vida Alexander, this is no exception. In this connection, Jasbir Jain says something significant. In fact, the diasporic urge to appropriate space at home and to use it for self-sustenance abroad is partly responsible for their non-acceptance by some societies. Indians abroad have experienced various kinds of marginalization and rejections, distrust and dislocations, and the message should now go home. One needs to strike roots at emotional levels, not merely physical ones. Jasbir Jain's point is that literature which theoretically should have risen above narrow identifications is anchoring in parochial affiliations. In Alexander's poem, one finds the poet perfectly at home with the diasporic existence, but side by side, the feeling of not belonging to nations to be emotionally involved with a particular country. Of course, she settled finally in the US, but she always had the burden of previous migrations in her psyche. In her poem, The Travelers, she writes, consider as crawling followers in thunder and rain, possessions strewn through airports in dusty capitals, small stoppages in unknown places where the soul sleeps. Bahrain, Dubai, London, New York, names thicken and crack as fate is cut and chopped into boarding buses. These multiple displacements involve a constant dehoming and rehoming for Alexander, which reminded her of her hyphenated identity. In the words of Shikha Malviya, an Indo-American poet and writer, she writes, Alexander's use of poetic images and metaphors of fracture and being torn brought to life the raw, rough-edged beauty of dislocation. The themes of loss, assimilation, and shifting identities make up the spinning globe from which Alexander's poems emerge, on one whose meridians she has been riding the past 4 decades, charting new territory while altering old ones. She also points out that Alexander's work has always embraced a constant tussle between who we are and how we got there. And in this connection, I would like to go to Professor Lahiri's book. In this connection, I would also like to mention what Himatri Lahiri in his book, Asia Troubles, writes. Referring to Alexander's own words, he observes, the idea of the diasporic subject as a rootless being gives birth to the image of the traveler. Maynard Alexander, a noted poet, novelist, and critic with multiple diasporic poets, similarly contends that identity of the diasporic subject is like a train heading for destination and stopping at stations on its way. She herself does not have any idea about her own destination. Viewed from this perspective, each stoppage is a point for fresh departure. The identity of such a person is a continuous process of being formed and reformed. The fixity of belonging, especially to the originary culture or country, is cancelled in the process. But I doubt whether in case of Alexander that was cancelled. While the above words very appropriately describe Alexander's diasporic existence, she could never forget, or rather, she deliberately clung to her roots, to her country of origin, in fight to fight a sense of insecurity that was perhaps ingrained in her psyche. The following poem bears testimony to this. In Art of Pariah, she says, this is another poem. Next one, yes. The Queen of Nubia, of God's upper kingdom, the Rani of Jhansi, transfigured, raising her soul up there too. They have entered with me into North America and share these worlds. We pick up an art of pariahs. Two black children, spray painted white, their eyes burning. A white child wrecked in a car for plain scheme's sake. An Indian child stoned by the bus shelter. They thought her white in twilight. The very title of the poem speaks of the poet's attitude towards her diasporic existence. She considers herself as a pariah, an outcast, who has no roots in her migrated position. She forms an association with the two queen figures, one from Africa and the other from India, with whom she feels a psychological bonhomie to buttress her position. The poem also speaks of the racial discrimination faced by children of diasporic community. The poet is painfully aware of her ethnic identity and the feeling of being otherized surfaces in her poems recurrently. To conclude, I again go back to what Jean says about the intimate connection between memory and identity in Asian diaspora poetry. Referring to Stuart Hall, Jean says, last slide is, one of the central themes in Asian diaspora poetry is the rehabilitation of memory as a vital part of their identity articulation. As Hall points out, almost all current arguments and debates about identity actually have roots that extend far back in time. The relation that peoples of the world now have to their own past is, of course, part of the discovery of their own ethnicity. Asian diaspora community provides a significant space for Asian diaspora communities to preserve their symbolic repertories and cultural consciousness. Memory in this sense becomes an effective strategy for them to reinforce their original traditions and to strengthen their cultural cohesion. So, in Alexander's poems on migration, she follows this strategy in effectively negotiating our in-betweens. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shural, for your wonderful presentation. I'm grateful to Professor Shural for the kind of presentation he made. There is absolute clarity of thought and analysis. He has obviously placed Mina Alexander in the context of Asian diaspora, which is very interesting because he has drawn from several Asian countries, poets originating from Asian countries. And I also thank him because there is a growing corpus of poetry Indian, American poetry, and other branches of Asian poetry. But interestingly, there is not much research on the corpus, the poetic corpus. And therefore, he has done a good job by examining, interpreting poetry of region by Alexander. In recent times, Kashyana Singh, Toshani Doshi, Anindita Sengupta, and a host of other poets originating from India but now located in the US are writing wonderful poems, and the corpus has grown in the meantime. And they are also talking of memory and identity, the intersection between gender, class, memory, etc. Kashyana Singh has recently published one interesting book, Woman by the Door, which was published in 2022 itself, and it has received rave reviews also. Professor Shural has actually examined how the trajectory of Alexander's poetry, especially where memory works and it works simultaneously at different spaces and different times. He has given many examples where ruptures work and dislocations take place, and how one finds home and one loses home as one crosses boundaries. So the concept of the boundary crossing, which is very central in Alexander's poems, has been covered and analyzed by Professor Shural. I don't have much to say about this. He has explained the basic qualities of our poetry. Now, if you have any questions or comments to make, you are most welcome. If there are any questions, any question or any comment?
One question
Please.
that comes to your mind. How memories are in this perception of migration from one place to another place, and again from that place to from Sudan to another place, from that place to US, concerning that poem by Mina Alexander. How memories are correlated to depicting a good identity in the poem depicted by Mina Alexander.
Yes, I think I have already quoted lines from the poem. I just repeat that and then take my side also. The poem that I mentioned as Krishna, I quoted, the many words you have passed through, try to remember them as I do mine. Memory is all you have, and these italics, you see the slide. The slide shows these lines in italics, and they are not done by me. So they are done by the poet person. So you can understand that multiple migrations, and she talks about many words. Every time there is a migration, she equates it with a new word, and she makes her best efforts to acclimatize. To appropriate the culture of the location of migration. But still, because of this wonderful migration, she had always at the back of her mind that immigrant's anxiety. And that anxiety actually made her fall back to her memory again and again. So memory actually is very important in case of maintaining a connection to her roots. Otherwise, she always feels the same sense of rootlessness, because that is central in diaspora literature. Right. So that is actually the connection between memory and identity in case of itself.
Any other question? Any other question? If there is no question, I think I should wind up the session. So thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Shural.
So, one important announcement. So now thank you, Professor Sula, for excellent presentation. And now we'll move on to the next part, the most important part, I think, that we will take our lunch. So lunch break for half an hour. So Act 2 today will start. We have two paper presentations by two plenary speakers. Then we have valedictory speech by Dr. Mahavidyalaya. So I request our students Act 2. Okay, I like to see the hall full. Don't try to go, don't take the risk of going home, taking lunch to the students. Don't take the risk. Thank you.